Today is day 2 of our 30-day journey through the Bible, the 30-day Bible Challenge. And we're going to talk about the book of Exodus. And of course, Exodus sounds like exit because it's the escape from Egypt. And this book is about trust. So let's get started. We learned yesterday how that God's people were encouraged to go to Egypt to escape a famine. And then in the book of Exodus, we learn how that the rulers in Egypt, as generations changed, trusted the Israelites less and less and thought they might take over. So they put out a rule to kill the babies, the Israelite babies, so that they couldn't take over the country. And so one of the Israelite mothers, she hid her baby in a basket and put the baby in the Nile River and had her daughter watch the baby in the basket as it went down the Nile. And the baby was found by the Pharaoh's daughter, the king's daughter, and she raised him, and he grew into the man that we all know as Moses. Now, Moses knew that he wasn't really an Egyptian. He was a Hebrew. He was an Israelite. And so when he saw the Israelite people being abused, he stood up for their rights and ended up killing an Egyptian. And when the Pharaoh found out that Moses had killed an Egyptian, Moses ran away and hid in the desert in Egypt, in Midian. And when he was in Midian, he saw a bush, and the bush was on fire, but the bush was not being burned by the fire. And so he approached it, and the burning bush was God's way of calling Moses and telling Moses that he no longer wanted his people to be slaves and that he was going to step in and help them after hundreds of years of slavery, because that they had prayed and they had asked God to save them. So Moses, who wasn't a terribly brave person, he kept on making excuses. I can't lead your people out. I don't talk very well. And God said, well, your brother Aaron, he talks very well, so he'll help you. So Moses kept on making excuses about how he killed someone, and God said, don't worry, I will be with you. You have to trust me. Remember, today's theme is trust. So Moses goes back to his family and gets his brother Aaron. This is Aaron. He's wearing his priest garb because we're going to learn how that Aaron was the first priest. And they go to Pharaoh, and they tell Pharaoh to let the Israelite people, leave Egypt, but he won't do it. So then Aaron and Moses go back to God and say, God, Pharaoh won't listen to us. How can you make him listen? And he said, I will send plagues. I will show my power to Pharaoh so that he'll know that you were sent by me. So what happened was there was 10 plagues that God had Moses send to Egypt. They turned the water to blood, and they killed the cattle, and there was skin disease and hail and frogs, and it just 10 terrible things that was to change the minds of the Egyptians. And finally, the firstborn sons throughout Egypt would die. But God didn't want the Hebrew firstborn children to die. So he said, Moses, so that I know which one of you are my followers, I want you to perform a ritual. And that ritual today we call the Passover. And what God said is, if you want to protect the firstborn children of the Israelites, I want you to have a dinner. I want you to have wine. I want you to have flat bread and bitter herbs and sacrifice a lamb. And I want you to have the men tie their clothes so that they can run away from Egypt and take their families with them. So they tied their sandals to their feet and they tied their other loose clothing around their waist. Oh, and they put blood on the door so that when the angel of death came to Egypt, they would pass over the followers of God and only attack the people that didn't believe in God. And when this happened, Pharaoh said, all right, Moses, you can go. But then Pharaoh followed Moses to the Red Sea. Moses was told by God how to part the waters of the sea so that when Moses and his family crossed the Red Sea, they'd cross on dry land. And when the Egyptians tried to follow them, they were washed away by the sea. As a Christian, I think of this almost like our baptism, that we are leaving our sinful life behind us. We're leaving our Egypt behind us. And we're crossing over into God's service because we trust God. Again, we're getting back to our theme of trust. Now, as they're crossing the sea, we're going to learn what has happened to Moses' sister. We first met Moses' sister when she protected the baby Moses. But as they're crossing the sea, Miriam starts singing a song, and she comforted the people of the Israelite people, and that is her role as part of this new church movement being formed. So as they're crossing the sea, she's singing so that nobody will be afraid. And another person we're going to meet after they cross is a man named Joshua, well, a young man, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. When they cross the Red Sea and the Egyptians are washed away and everybody's cheering, but some people, they're confused, they don't know what to do. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, said, there's a lot of people complaining. You should divide up all the work. And one of the people that Moses got to help him with his work was a man named Joshua. And we'll learn about Joshua. He's got a book of the Bible that we're going to read in a few days. So, but this is our first meeting with Joshua when people were complaining there was no water. And God told Moses how to get water for his people. So, this is our division. This is almost like the origin of the modern day church. We've got the leader, we've got the priest, and we've got the worship leader. Miriam would do all of like the women's groups. Moses would do all the leadership. He'd run the politics, he'd run the organization, make sure everybody was getting paid, make sure everybody got food, and then Aaron would perform all the priestly duties. So it's almost like the division of power that we have today in our modern church. So Moses says to God, thank you for helping us escape from Egypt. And God said, well, go up to the top of the mountain and I'll tell you what to do next. So Moses walked up to the top of the mountain, and God gave him commandments. He gave him the law. He told the Israelites how they were to live their lives in order to be saved. And Moses, with God's help, constructed these tablets with the law written on them and brought them down to his family, to the 12 tribes that were the descendants of Joseph and his brothers, the descendants of Israel, of Jacob. But when he got down from the mountain with these tablets, he saw that the people were no longer worshiping God. The people were worshiping a golden calf. And Moses asked Aaron, well, where did this calf come from? And Aaron said, well, you know how these people are. They were complaining and they didn't trust you anymore. They didn't trust God anymore. So they wanted a new God. And I told them to bring all their gold jewelry, and they did. And I threw it in the fire, and out came this bull. Now, it didn't say that Aaron created the bull, it said that the bull came out of the fire. So it almost made itself. I don't know how that happened. I don't know who was responsible for constructing the bull, but the Bible doesn't specifically say that Aaron constructed it. So there was something going on there. But Moses was rightfully upset with what happened because the people no longer trusted God, no longer trusted him. And so he smashed the Ten Commandments, he smashed the law of God, and he went back to God and said, you know, I'm so sorry what my people did, what your people did, and we were going to fix this. What do we do now? And God gave them a second copy of the law, and he told Moses, well, this is what I want you to do. The people obviously don't know how to worship, so we're going to tell you how to worship. We want you to construct an ark. This is a box to hold the law. So the law was kept inside this box, and there's rings on the side of the box because this box contains the Word of God. So no human being is worthy enough to touch the box. So I want you to put rods through the box and carry the box only by these long rods. Because if anybody touches the box, they are going to die. This was the Ark of the Covenant. And this is going to be the dwelling place. God's going to dwell over the law. So they're going to carry this in front of them. So God will always be in front of them as they walk to the promised land. And if the law is inside of this box, then we need someplace to put the box. So, but because they're walking, it's got to be something they can construct. So they constructed a tent to keep the box in. And this smoke is where God was. The people couldn't see God directly because if they looked at God directly, they would die. So they saw this smoke, though, that represented God. But before that, because Aaron was the only one allowed, him and the rest of the priests were the only ones allowed inside this tabernacle. So, but before they could do that, they had to make a sacrifice. So they built an altar to sacrifice an animal, to sacrifice grain. And after they made the sacrifice, they had to bathe themselves. So we have a pool here. And then they went inside the tabernacle to worship God. And of course, this represents God's presence, this smoke here. And they always, when they entered, they always constructed the tabernacle from east to west. You always walked westward toward God because when Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, they were expelled eastward. So if you want to go toward the Garden of Eden, if you want to go toward God, you go in a westward direction. We'll talk more about that later as we get into Leviticus and Numbers. So that is where we are right now. We have Aaron and Moses and Miriam, and they're the leaders of the church. And this is the breastplate that Aaron wore. And each one of these jewels represents a different tribe of Egypt, represents Joshua and his 11 brothers. And we will talk about them more tomorrow. Thank you very much for spending some time to us. And I hope you're enjoying this. And I hope you're taking your own 30-day Bible journey. Thank you very much.